Okay, so from here, let me excuse, to speak in English to directly communicate with the guest lecturers. So today, we would like to do, this post-digital architecture now keynote session. And to get understanding what's post-digital about. I would like to start from to talk about what we are confronting, at the time of now. And I would like to start from this topic, of Venice Biennale this year, which was set by the director Carlo Latti. And then he set this topic as intelligence, natural, artificial, collective. And this means he questioned what kind of intelligence we can gather to this tackle on the issue of environmental and societal, maybe even political crisis that we are facing. And then having Venice as a symbol of those crises, as a city, to be about to be sinking, underneath ocean water. And another important keyword, that he presented, was confronting against, those crises. He said, we need to move on, from mitigation towards adaptation. And mitigation is like when our control, full control, over those, let's say, climate system or, social system, then, if there is, impossibility, we need to mitigate, what we are confronting, like CO2. But, that maybe it's not enough anymore. In that case, after, those crises happen, we need to adapt ourselves, to those situations. And as an exhibition, let's say, this Belgian pavilion, they presented, the project, building biospheres, which is like utilizing those plants, as almost like sensors, to understand the climate. And, trying to get information out of, plants, then utilize it, to control, our artificial environment also. Or Canada Pavilion, the project, Picoplanktonics, they were presenting the material which hardens, being, how do I say, reacting, to CO2 and light and water. Meaning, when, there is a CO2, building, becomes more and more harder. So that they are trying to somehow turns architecture, building, into some plants-like, creature. So that was like another approach. And in the Arsenale exhibition venue, like Philippe Yuan's project called Poiesis, there were many robots installed in the exhibition. And then towards the right one, real-time twin in Venice. That was like an urban ergonomics lab, from Tsinghua University. They presented, this real-time learning. I mean, in the exhibition, robot learns how people react, to against, their robotic movement, so that they can start to understand, how those, flow of people, is behaving, through the exhibition. So whether you agree or not, so those were, the things, that was presented, as an adaptation, strategy to the crisis these days. But, here's my question is, so does this adaptation and, control or, mitigation, kind of strategy, is happening only these days? And of course not. And if we look back in the history, of modern and contemporary architecture, when and how those adaptation and mitigation control perspectives have been formulated. And I would like to pick up, a 1932, MoMA exhibition, Modern Architecture exhibition, which, could understand and could be understood, as the rise of international style, meaning the strategy that interior space, can be brought under full control in a repeatable form anywhere on the earth. That was a very strong statement. And then, this kind of, statement, goes into the, movement, which is like, Rainer Banham, he wrote, this theory and design in the first machine age. And also Buckminster Fuller, he was presenting a project like Dome over Manhattan, which is basically, showing these 3 kilometers of, urban area, could be put under the control, of machine, like, again, architecture as a machine, to give a control over those climate. And, with this kind of, movement, of course, there starts to be a backlash, against it. And 1964, also, MoMA's exhibition, architecture without architecture, is presented. And, I just, read out, this text, that was in this, book. Craftsmen display a remarkable talent for adapting buildings to the natural environment. Rather than trying to conquer nature, as we do today, they gladly accept the whims of climate and the harshness of terrain. They work on the far more formidable and increasingly difficult problem of how they themselves live, how they enable others to live, and how to maintain peace with their neighbors, both in a local and a global sense. So this notion of adaptation, clearly it's stated here in this kind of manner. And then that triggered, of course, the following, writings such as Amos Rapport, House, Form and Culture, Paul Oliver, Shelter and Society. And 1970, this, Christopher Alexander, very famous, A Pattern Language, was coming out. And what was important here, as a notion of adaptation? It's not like, let's, try go back to indigenous, architecture, but how we can understand, those design as a process of adaptation to the environment, or design as a system for generating environments. And, what I'm gonna add, if I add, it is like how we can understand, those already there, already functioning something in front of us. It's complex, but can we understand it, as a system? So that was, already kind of, presented in those 60s and 70s. And I'm not going to go deeper, because of, time today. But, having, this input, in our brain, then today, those two guests, Jill and, and Ryan, who is featured, in this A+U post-digitality in architecture issue, which, I actually, guest edited as a guest editor. And then, they are also basically responding, to those, crises these days, which is like massive shortage of housings, rapid decrease of, craftsmen, like labor force, and hazardous disaster recovery, or simultaneous, deterioration of infrastructure. It's happening everywhere, particularly like in Japan. It's an enormous problem. And how we can, respond, to those things. And I think, this, again, remembering, this adaptation versus mitigation, mode of thinking, what we can question here, is rather than solely mitigating issues that became out of control, how can we transform ourselves to adapt to what is already going on in the crisis by unfolding the inherent complexities of them with digital technologies? So what's happening in front of us, is very complex. And then, without, those, latest digital technology, maybe it was difficult before, to understand, the system, of, those mechanisms of, what's happening. But maybe we can now finally, be able to access, to those mechanisms. Then we can systematically, approach to those issues. And after, if we can, transform ourselves and our society, to those already going on, crises, then how can we find a new way of seeing world within those infrastructural systems that disruptive digital technologies today will fundamentally update as responses, to those crises? So those two questions, I'm very keen, trying to figure out, through today's session. So I finished myself, at here, and would like to pass the baton, to Gilles and Ryan. So maybe, please welcome Gilles Retsin first as a guest lecturer.